quite honestly, since we're here in this setting of Custer State Park, I'd rather talk about that part of my legacy. You know, as a young boy, I was always fascinated about the natural world. I mean, I love the out of doors. I love being out of doors. I love stories and studying the birds and the animals of all sorts, even insects. Now, I was born and raised in New York City, and one would say, where in the world in New York City could one find birds and animals and insects? Well, they have parks, small parks, but they're there. And in those parks are cats and rats and mice and other rodents and insects and birds of all sorts. And as a small boy, I would go out and I would collect them. And then I would bring them home and I would study them, and I might even draw pictures of them. And I would look up their scientific names and I'd list them all. When I was 9 years old, my bedroom was so full of insects and birds and other small animals like mice that my bedroom became known as Roosevelt's Museum of Natural History. I was proud of that. When I was a young boy, my father gave me a rifle, a small Flaubert rifle, taught me how to shoot, how to be responsible with it. I think every American boy should be taught how to use weapons, rifles, and how to use them well and responsibly. And I did. I like to hunt with them. Now, I have always had poor eyesight, but I didn't know it. I used to read books by Audubon with pictures of birds, and I'd have to hold the book right up here so I could see it. I didn't know any better. When I went hunting on Long Island, my friends who I'd be with, they'd see a flock of birds, they'd raise their rifles and fire away. I couldn't even see what they were shooting at. And of course, if I raised my rifle to shoot, my friends hit the deck because they weren't sure if Roosevelt could see what he was firing at. As I got older, the things that I hunted got bigger. I loved the thrill of the hunt. I loved the chase. It's not so much the kill, it's pitting myself against nature, pitting myself against the animal. Some of the greatest hunting I did as a young man was over there in the Teton Mountains. I chased 3 mountain goats for 3 days in November. And it snows at 8,000 feet in the Tetons in November. I got one of them. But that wasn't the thrill. The thrill was chasing them. I loved that. When I got older, as the things got bigger, I decided, by golly, I had to have a buffalo. I mean, I just had to have a buffalo. I needed the head of a buffalo to put in my house in New York City. Put it above the fireplace. My wife, who we were fairly newly married, she was with our first child, and I'm thinking, what better thing for a young wife to have than to stand in the parlor holding our new baby underneath the head of a buffalo? I mean, what woman wouldn't want that in her life, huh? So, and I had that itch. I just had to go. My wife said, Theodore, if you've got an itch, it's got to be scratched. Get out of here. Go west. And so I got on a train, and for 5 days I went across America to the far western Dakota Territory. I tell you this today, if I had not gone west, I would not have become president. 2 weeks I spent there hunting buffalo. 2 of the most miserable weeks that you could imagine. I didn't see hardly anything while I was out there in the wilderness. I got off the train in Little Missouri, Dakota Territory, which is now Medora, North Dakota. And I went back there and we searched and couldn't find a buffalo until near the end. I did get my buffalo. And it was an old buffalo, old bull buffalo, had gray hair, probably had arthritic knees. It seemed to be kind of tired of just living. It's like, well, just shoot me and get it over with. But it was a buffalo, and I got it, and I proudly brought it home. But more than the buffalo, more than anything else, was I started to develop my sense of wonder and, how shall I say, my enthusiasm toward our natural world even grew more. You see, I learned that man has its ideas of what we want, how we want things to happen, but sometimes Mother Nature says, just a second there, I'm in charge here, and man gets taught a lesson. In 1887, I was a ranchman. I had 2 ranches. I had 1,000 head of cattle. And like other ranchmen in the Dakota Territory, I overstocked and overgrazed. The winter of 87 brought the worst snowstorm, worst winter on recorded history. 70% of all the cattle in the territory were lost. 70%! It wasn't much as much the code as it was, well, we had pitted ourselves against nature thinking we could control it, and we couldn't. The cattle died because we overstocked and overgrazed. And we weren't good stewards of the land. And that lesson, along with others, taught me where I wanted to be. You have to excuse me a second, but it is getting a little bit warm in here. And as such, my pince-nez tend to slip down my nose. So, like every good politician, I come prepared for something else. When I was in Cuba, I had my wife sew 7 pairs of glasses in my hat so that if I broke one pair, that I'd have 7 more to choose from. Yeah, that's better. These don't slip quite so much. But that lesson was learned. And I could see it everywhere as I traveled across America. That my generation and my father's generation and my grandfather's generation were turning this nation into a garbage heap, a trash pit. I thought then and there, by golly, if I'm the only American that cares enough to try and do something and to stop this destruction, then so be it. But fortunately for me, there were millions of other Americans who saw such a waste. They just needed someone to speak for them, to get it out. And so I was one of those that started to speak for them, saying we have to take care of our natural resources. We have to use them wisely. We can cut down forests, but we have to replant forests. We can't just willy-nilly cut them down and walk away. This land is too great for that. God has given us so much here as people who inhabit this land that it's not right. It's not humanly right just to destroy it and walk away. The United States of America was made for the ages. We're going to be around for a long time, so it behooves you and me and you to treat it that way. We're building this country for our children's children and their children's children and children we don't even know about. And so, by golly, we had better start to live the dream the correct way. Some people said our national parks were America's greatest idea, and they might be right. In 1888, I helped form the Boone and Crockett Club, and this is very important because that became a very strong lobby group against Congress to protect our national parks. Now, I've been given credit. I've been thanked for creating the national parks, the National Park Service. But I didn't do this. The first national park was authorized by Congress in 1870 and signed into law by Ulysses S. Grant. In 1870, I was only 12 years old. That's a heck of a 12-year-old, but I'm still only 12 years old. And only Congress can authorize a national park. And in the 30 years after that, they authorized 4 more national parks: Yosemite, Sequoia, Mount Rainier, and General Grant National Park. That's pretty good, 5. It's not good enough, not in Theodore Roosevelt's world. And the biggest problem is only Congress can authorize a national park. Now, you may get the idea, listening to me speak, that I don't think much of the United States Congress. And the fact is that Theodore Roosevelt doesn't think much of the United States Congress. I feel that it's filled with scallywags and rascals and rapscallions of all sorts. And most people that are in Congress are only there for their own benefit, to see how much they can take out of the public welfare for their own welfare. Why, in the Senate, when roll call is given each morning, the senators don't know whether to say present or not guilty. But only Congress can authorize a national park. The Boone and Crockett Club helped in some ways protect those national parks. You know, Congress being Congress, what they do best, they pass a bill and then they read it afterward to see what it was they passed. They don't really give a thought to what is needed and how best to do it, how best to support it. And then in this case, they did the same thing. Why, Congress only allowed one troop of Army cavalry to guard each park. One troop! 60 to 80 men. 60 to 80 men on horseback in Yellowstone. It's not a fair matchup. You know what? And they had no power. If you go into the park and with your shotgun you find a herd of elk and you shoot down 25 elk and you stand there proudly amidst the carnage, when the army comes up, you know what they can do to you? No, I'm about to tell you. They take your gun away. Can you imagine that? They took your gun away. And then they kicked you out of the park. And you know what you would do? You'd go get another gun and come back in the park somewhere else. In Yosemite National Park, shepherds were bringing their sheep onto the park, onto the lush, wonderful grasslands. They were destroying the grasslands. And if they were caught, the army could escort them and the sheep off of the property. And of course, being good shepherds, they just turned around, came back on the property somewhere else. That is, until an army captain, who deserves a higher rank than just captain for his imagination, he kind of solved the problem. He not only arrested the shepherds, he arrested the sheep. And then he took them to one side of the park and released the shepherds out into the wood, or the sheep out into the woods. He went to the other side of the park, miles away, and let the shepherd out over there. Then it was the shepherd's job to go and find the sheep if he could. Well, that put a stop to that. But it wasn't enough. So in September of 1901, I was determined, upon taking the office of president, that by golly, I was going to have more national parks, and we were going to do everything we could to preserve them. Now, I knew right then where I wanted my first national park to be. I knew the site of it. Now, I say my national park. Look, I admit, God created our national parks. Man just could have put a title to them, you know. So it's me and God together there when I say that. But I knew right where I wanted my national park to be. I wanted it to be in a place so epic, so grand, so spectacular, that everybody would have to say, this should be a national park. So where do you think I wanted my first national park? Anybody want to guess?
Maine.
Where?
Maine.
Maine?
Yeah.
Are you from Maine?
No.
Oh. Why in the world would you say Maine? Okay, I appreciate the guess. That's a good guess, but wrong. Okay, yes.
Medora, North Dakota.
Where?
Medora.
No, you're wrong. You're going to have to join him.
I was going to say Yellowstone, but that was already made. So.
Where at?
Not Yellowstone.
Not Yellowstone. Very good. It's not Yellowstone. Well, that is a correct
She
answer.
said the Grand
Canyon.
Grand Canyon. My goodness. Grand. I gave you a clue right there. Look, the Grand Canyon. Theodore Roosevelt. They just kind of go together. They're one and the same. But I couldn't do it. You see, only Congress can authorize a national park. And at the Grand Canyon, there were mining interests, timber interests, cattle interests, and even the people in Arizona didn't want us to be in the Grand Canyon, and they had strings tied all the way back to Washington, D.C., where attached to certain congressmen, they danced a merry tune. It was a fight I knew that I could not win. I could not get Congress to authorize. I love a fight. I don't mind any type of fight. I'll take a black eye, because you know Theodore Roosevelt's going to get up off the floor and give you 2 in return. But I couldn't afford to lose that fight. I needed our national parks to be up here in the minds of Americans. And if I couldn't get the first national park through, when could I get the second? Because there was going to be more than one if I had anything to say about it. You know, I couldn't afford to lose that fight. We Americans needed to be aware of how great this country is and how great our national resources, our national parks, our national forests mean to us. And so Gifford Pinchot, Chief Forester of the United States, a man I think should have a statue at the entrance of every national forest, comes to me and says, Mr. Roosevelt, forget the Grand Canyon for a little bit, which is hard for Roosevelt to do. He says, I know a place in the great northwest of these United States, so pristine, so pure, so beautiful, that no one would argue against it being a national park. Better yet, no congressman seems to have a special interest in it. They'll pass it. Now, where do you think, on May 2nd, 1902, I signed into being Roosevelt's first national park? Glacier. You'll have to join him. You're wrong. But that's okay. 2 of you together probably can work this out. Now, I realize that most of you are exposed to the great American educational system, which means that your geography is sincerely lacking. Olympia. All 3 of you need to get together, right?
Right here. You got it.
All right, Mal. What is it?
Redwoods.
What?
Redwoods.
Oh my goodness. Now I don't blame you. I blame the school system. You know, when I look at a map and I think northwest, I think the top of the map. And when I say west, I think the Pacific Ocean. Crater Lake. Did you have help? Come on, fess up. Did you have help? No, you didn't use one of those new modern machines to cheat, did you? You didn't look, oh, okay, all right. Well, 1 out of 5 isn't bad. That's 20%. You'll get better. Crater Lake. Now, my second national park, about a year later, not too far from here. Actually, it's very, very close. Where do you think my second national park is? You know, you are the first person this whole 3 weeks at Rushmore that got that right. Because of that, here's a newly minted Mount Rushmore quarter. That's for being smart and brave enough to ask it. Now, after Wind Cave came Solly's Hill in North Dakota, then the Platte National Grassland in Oklahoma, and then Mesa Verde in Colorado. 5 national parks in 7.5 years. That's pretty good.
Yes.
Not good enough, but it's pretty good. And then Congress did something on June 8, 1906, that it so rarely does. It actually passed an act that benefited the people of these United States more than it benefited any single congressman. They passed the Act for American Antiquities. This is a wonderful act. This is a great act, a glorious act. It simply said that the President of the United States, Theodore Roosevelt, could, upon any federal property that he deemed of historic, environmental, scientific, social value, he could declare that property a national monument without asking Congress, without having to deal with spatial interests. If I thought that there was a place for a national monument, by golly, it became a national monument. And what do you have? Oh, you answered the question before I even asked. Okay. You may have to remind folks later on, okay? August of 1900, well, the act simply said, I could create, there are dozens of places in these United States that deserve to be a national monument. Best of all, when Congress discovered that I liked that and that I was ready to act, they tried to handcuff Roosevelt. They wanted to limit how much I could do. And so they put a clause in. The maximum amount of land that I could declare a national monument is the minimum amount needed for its protection, security, and maintenance. This is wonderful. This is grand. For Theodore Roosevelt's idea of small is many times larger than any congressman's. And so in August of 1906, I created my first national monument where? Where? You got it. You had it. You want me to take that coin back? You get your coin and you. Devil's Tower. That's a right. That a girl. Devil's Tower over, well, not too far from here. My 13th national monument is not very far from here. Where do you think it is? Not very far at all.
Jewel Cave?
Did you, Jewel Cave? Excellent. You're the first person this year to get that right. I appreciate that. I'm not giving you a coin, but you get my hearty congratulations. My administration had 17 or 18 total national monuments. Now, if the legacy of Theodore Roosevelt means anything, and if someone asked me what I thought my administration's greatest accomplishments were, I always said, and will always say, the acquiring of and building of the Panama Canal. And the second one, the sending of the Great White Fleet around the world. I wanted to show Germany and France and England and especially Japan that we were a two-ocean navy and that we were not to be trifled with or bullied. And if they start, any of them, started something with the United States, by golly, our Navy would finish it. And so I was glad of that. But if the legacy is 4 national game preserves, 5 national parks, the first 18 national monuments, 21 federal reclamation projects, the first 51 bird refuges, 150 national forests, and 250 million acres brought under the protection of the federal government and away from developers, well, that's a legacy that any president ought to be able to live with. Now, that brings me to probably the real learning part of this presentation. Mount Rushmore, where I've been invited to speak these past few weeks, is not a national park. What is Mount Rushmore? It's a national memorial. It's a memorial, yes. It's a memorial to the 4 figures you see up on the mountain. The question is, why those 4 figures? What is it about those 4 men that made the South Dakota commissioners, with the advice of Goots and Gorgon, put those 4 figureheads up on the mountain? Why is George there? I can tell you why, and I will. And because you're moderns, I'm going to be blunt about it. It's not because they're men. It's not because they're white. It is not because they were all wealthy, which they were not. All of them, anyway. George is the wealthiest man we ever had in the office. And it's not because they were experts at politics, manipulating and pulling in favors and such. The reason is for what they did in office and who they were, their character. So why is George up on the mountain? Why did they pick George Washington so prominently at Mount Rushmore? Anybody? Yes, sir.
Because he led us through the Revolutionary War.
I'm sorry, he was what?
He led us through the Revolutionary War.
That he did,
freed us
and
from
you're
Britain.
wrong. That's not the reason. But you were right, kind of. You girls want to work with him a little bit. Yes, why do you think he was? You are exactly right. I don't know how many of these I have left, but you're a smarter bunch of kids than I thought. By the way, those are minutes just from Mount Rushmore, and they're worth 25 cents, so you better spend it wisely. George was the first president. He knew he was the first, and he knew he had to act like the first. And if he does not succeed as our first president, we die a young death. Those Europeans are right. You Yankees don't know how to take care of yourselves. All you do is shoot and fight and yell at one another. You'll never get along. You don't know how to govern a nation, and you're going to build a nation out of 13 fighting colonies? Why, it's impossible. You'll never make a republic stand up. But George was the type of man that he was. He knew that everything he did set a precedent for every person to follow. You had to be a president. You had to act like a president. And you had to know how to lead different people together down the same road. And he did. He did a wonderful job. And because George Washington was truly the father of the country, he's up on the mountain and deserves to be. Next to him is Thomas Jefferson. That's good. I was afraid where you were going there for a second. Thomas Jefferson. Yeah, now I don't think much of Mr. Jefferson as a president. He was a good writer, I got to give him that. He was a great dancer, I'm told. And if you've been up on the mountain recently, he has pretty good ice cream. But other than that, in his administration, he does only one thing that even Theodore Roosevelt has to say he deserves to be up on that mountain. What is the one thing Thomas Jefferson does? This young lady back here gets a chance. I couldn't hear it, I'm sorry. I still couldn't hear it.
Declaration of Independence.
Oh, the Declaration of Independence? No. He was a good writer, but that's not why he's up on the mountain. Madam? The what? The Louisiana Purchase is why he's up there. Our nation, at the stroke of a pen of agreement with old Napoleon, our nation goes from being cramped between the Atlantic and the Mississippi, all the way to the Pacific. France is no longer going to be able to colonize that territory. England won't be able to colonize that territory. Spain won't be able to colonize that territory. America is, for good or bad, is going westward. We are going to grow. We're going to be something that the world has never seen before. And he acquired the Louisiana Purchase to kind of inspire that growth. He didn't even know what he had. He sends Lewis and Clark out saying, I just bought all this land from Napoleon. Go out and tell me what I bought. It was a great deal. It Manifest Destiny was going to be under many Americans' doctrines. For good or ill, we are going to grow. Pardon me. And I can understand why the South Dakota commissioners put him up on that mountain. You're sitting in the Louisiana Purchase right now. So there's no wonder that he deserves to be up there. Now, the man on the far right, as you look at it, the bearded fellow, who is Abraham Lincoln, very good. In his short time in office, he does many great things. The Louisiana Purchase, that's Jefferson. The Land Grant Act, the Homestead Act, the Transcontinental Railroad, the Emancipation Proclamation. But he does one other thing that has to be done. It has to be done. And it affects world history for decades to come. You think he's got it?
Got it, I know.
Okay, one more chance here.
Emancipation
Oh,
Proclamation.
you didn't say that.
I just said it wasn't that. Somebody take him outside and hit him with a stick.
Gettysburg Address.
No, someone else. Anybody else?
Over here,
Oh, there.
we'll keep the nation as a whole.
That's right, he preserves the Union. He wins the Civil War. Marshall Burr and I are Civil War buffs. We've studied this. We know of no other man of that type who could have won the war as president of these United States. Because he was the type of man that he was, the Union is preserved. If he doesn't preserve the Union, we're not two countries. We'll definitely be three countries and maybe four. The Emancipation Proclamation doesn't mean anything because the South is a separate nation. They're not going to follow that rule. And the West is growing toward the Pacific. They'll sell things to the North and the South, but they're not going to be much involved in it. Transcontinental Railroad won't be built like it was. And more importantly, if he does not preserve the Union as us as one nation, what happens in 1914 or 17 when Europe calls upon help from America to fight against the Kaiser in Germany, Austria? What happens if the North, with its German heritage, says, no, I think we'll fight on the Kaiser's side? And the South, with its Southern heritage, says, no, I think we'll fight on the English side. And the West says, we'll sell arms and ammunition to everybody. America responds, and the Kaiser's defeated. Even more so, in World War II, the United States of America, preserved through the Civil War, not only fights and wins a two-ocean war, we supply our allies with material and men to wage that war successfully. And at the end of it, we rebuild two defeated nations. Could that have been done if we'd been 2 or 3 or 4 nations? Probably not. And so one cannot argue with the fact that Abraham Lincoln is up on that mountain. Finally, that leads us to the last president up on that mountain. Why do you think that Theodore Roosevelt was chosen by the commission to be up there? Other than I give a certain rugged manliness to the other 3, why do you think they selected Theodore Roosevelt? Yes, sir.
Your conservation achievements.
That was part of it. The legacy that I told you about. That was part of it. Yes.
So, like what you said, so like you're like trying to conserve like
That's kind of it.
plants,
But,
and then you also do the national parks.
well, that's part of it too. You were close. Yes, sir.
Like the national park?
No, that's the same answer, but that's close. Yes, sir.
Panama Canal. That would go.
That is closer to it than anything else. The Americans of that time knew that Theodore Roosevelt had a vision of the United States, a desire that we were on the world scene now. We are no longer second-rate nation to England or France or Germany or any of them. We are not going to the table as second-hand cousins begging for scraps, having them to take us seriously. No, by golly, we Americans are here. We are growing and we are strong, and this nation is building up to one day lead the world.